Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that the right book at the right time can change lives, and that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do here on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature: picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels for readers of all ages. In each episode, we'll talk with children's literature authors and discuss their books, their hopes, their dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. Whether you're an adult reading to their inner child or connecting the young readers in your life with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today I'm talking with Regina Linke. Regina writes and illustrates stories that celebrate East Asian folklore and philosophy in a modern and accessible way. She's written the beloved webcomic The Oxherd Boy, parables of love, compassion, and community, accompanied with beautiful illustrations. And she's here today to talk about her newest release, Big Enough, a picture book about a little boy who learns he is big enough to do big things. It's an empowering story inspired by traditional Chinese philosophy, and I can't wait to share its message with all of you. So let's just get right to the episode. Regina, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I mentioned before we hit record that I love when I get to meet new to me authors, and you joked that you are a new to
Mhm.
you author. So likely you are new to many of the listeners listening, which is always exciting. So I would love for you to start with you. Give us an introduction to you and your beautiful work and the journey that you took to children's literature.
Okay. Well, how much time do we have?
It's a loaded question, I know.
I am very new to children's literature. It's something that I thought might be fun to transition into because, as you said, The Oxherd Boy it started out as a webcomic and then became a collection of inspirational parables for adults. And what was interesting was because I started the project actually when my son was about 4 years old and he was starting to ask a lot of big questions about life and death and fairness and what it means to be a good friend and things like that. And so when I started the Oxford Boy as a way to combine traditional Chinese brush painting with East Asian philosophy, I chose some really fun characters, a boy and his family ox and this rabbit who lives in his garden. And I thought, hey, this is great. My son now understands everything that he needs to know about life, except we were on vacation living when we were living in Taiwan at the time. We were on vacation and he suddenly asked again, what happens after we die? And I was like, oh, well, I'll just refer to this book that I wrote. And I started describing the Buddhist concept of, basically reincarnation, which did not go over well at all. And so I realized that, okay, there's something missing in translation for a younger audience. And so Big Enough, my debut picture book, it's the first original story about the Oxford Boy and the characters that you find there, was written, therefore, with the intention of a younger audience in mind.
There have been a lot of authors who have come onto the podcast and have said it's been their children. It's either been becoming a parent or, listening to their kids or having an experience with their kids that
Yes.
launched that idea. And I love that those big, curious questions sparked that for you and then eventually led to your picture book.
Mhm.
How old is your son now? Does he realize what a gift big enough is as a tribute to him and his questions?
He is 8.5 now. I always have to include the half.
Yes.
um, and yes, he has often considered himself my co-author, and he definitely was shocked when he discovered his name did not appear on the cover, in the bylines. And but I managed to get him to settle for a dedication instead.
Yeah, that's
And a number of images that you'll see in the book also, it has his expressions for the boy Afu, and I've relied so much on photos of him to use as reference.
I love knowing that because one of the things that we'll get to is talking about the process
Hmm.
of creating the book, of the
Right.
illustrations, and there are lots of things that I love about the book, but I am so drawn to the facial expressions of both the boy and the ox. You have managed to bring both to life in this beautiful emotional way that just it warms a reader's heart. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And now I know that real life inspiration, that
Mhm.
that expression, that openness, that love even. It's just more special when I know that there's a piece
A
of your
real
son.
real person behind it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's introduce Big Enough to readers, to listeners. I would love for you to give listeners an overview of the book in your own words, so they can picture what they might be able to pick up in their hands.
Okay, sure. So, Big Enough combines uh, traditional Chinese brush painting styles in the illustration with a story that's really underpinned by the concept of compassion, which is so critical to traditional Buddhist philosophy. And in The Oxford Boy, the idea of compassion in Buddhism is represented by the character, the ox. And so um, the Big Enough follows the story of a young boy named Afu who is challenged with the responsibility of bringing his family's giant ox home from the woods for the very first time on his own for the very first time. And we're not really sure if he's ready to do it. He's not sure, the reader's not sure, and along the way, he gets a lot of different advice, and he has to figure out exactly the best way to become the ox herd boy and bring the ox home safely.
I wish we could say more, but if we do, we will spoil the book. So that was such a beautiful description right up and to the point, which is such a wonderful turning point, yet craft move, yet all sorts of things. Um, yeah, and I want to say so many things, but I think for whether you are 5 or 15 or 50, right? I think reading this book, because here on this podcast we think everyone should always read children's literature forever.
Mhm.
There's just a beauty in the multiple messages that are in the book, the themes that appear to readers. And I think depending on what a reader needs, a reader might tend to walk away with. But I'd love to hear from your perspective what you were hoping the lesson might be, the moral, the theme, whatever word we want to call it, kind of the essence of the
Mhm.
book that readers might walk away with. I'd love to hear that from you, and then I want to tell you from me.
Well, I don't want to sway what the takeaways that
True.
you got from it.
Oh,
So
I'll still be.
maybe you can go first.
I could go first. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there were a couple for me, and I'm reading as an adult,
Sure.
obviously. But in the beginning of the book, as you noted, it's his first time doing this big job, and he's not so sure that he's ready for it. And neither are the people around him. You know, they
Hmm.
are reminding him, don't do it this way, you're not big enough.
Hmm.
Also, don't do it this way, you're not big enough. Oh, and
Sure.
don't do it that way,
Yeah.
you're not big enough. And there are these messages that he's kind of taking in from the people around him, that I'm not big enough, I can't possibly do that thing. And yet something happens that perhaps gets him to change his mind, which is
Hmm.
kind of the unexpected, for me, the unexpected person in the book that might get him to change his mind about himself. But I couldn't help as a reader just think about all those messages that we get that may give us a message that we're not big enough or good enough or blank enough, that are not done in a negative spirit, but more in a way to protect and to make sure that you're safe and to help you, move along. But that sometimes we internalize those
Hmm.
messages until something teaches us that in fact we might be more capable than we
Hmm.
think. And that for me was what I was taking away, especially in this world now where there are just so many messages, that
Right.
people, young kids especially, internalize. And this reminds them that, at least for me as this reader, that maybe we're not that message. And maybe we are big enough to do whatever the big thing is,
Hmm.
um, for us. And so that's where my reading heart went in reading this.
Yay, well done. Yeah, that was definitely a big part, a big message that I wanted to convey through this story, because I think on the surface level, a younger child would just find it very fun, right?
Yes.
Um, that a kid is basically going against what, other people might have told him about himself, and it's more just like the entertainment of having that mirror of, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Oh, well, look at me, I'm doing it.
Mm.
And it has a very straightforward um line of, courage, facing your fears and powering through it. But then it's like you said, if you want to dig deeper into that, um, we all do start out, and that's something in Taoism. We all start out kind of as this uncarved block, a blank slate, and part of going through life is internalizing certain messages, and not that they were intentionally malicious messages or messages meant to underestimate us, but perhaps they were based on that particular individual's experience with the ox, or their assumptions about the ox's personality, about the situation that caused them to draw a conclusion, which then they imparted as advice. And part of growing up is developing our own intuition to take people's experiences and take people's advice and listen to them, but also think critically about the environment that we find ourselves in. Is this true about the ox? Is this true about me? And that's part of the growth of Afu, the main character, is he discovers things about the ox and himself that ultimately rendered some of the advice to be invalid or untrue, and he's able to find his own way to bringing the ox home, which is what everyone wanted in the first place.
Right. Right.
um, and so that's yeah, that's definitely one of the main takeaways that I really hope kids and their adults also are able to grasp from the storyline. And it's interesting because I did a couple of author visits at schools, and I was able to present this to, the youngest grade
Mhm.
levels, pre-K. But then I also presented it to, fifth and sixth graders who, we had a really great discussion about just exactly what we were talking about. And we're able to draw examples from our everyday life. When do rules and advice make sense, and when does it make sense for us to break those rules or to not follow those pieces of advice? So it's really great to draw connections at all different age levels.
So I have another loaded question for you, I think,
Bring it
now.
on.
As I'm turning all of this over in my mind, I'm seeing the different levels, right? At one level, this is a story that young kids will love at face value for the story and what happens and the characters in it. Then we could go deeper with either older students, definitely adults, and think about some of those meanings that they're taking away and their messages that they're taking away.
Mhm.
But as you mentioned earlier in the episode, when you were trying to explain some of these concepts to your son, they don't always land the same way for a younger audience. And so I'm curious of how you balanced all of that, of the story at one level for a young child versus the meaning of it and the cultural significance of it as well. Like how did you take big ideas like that and make it so that no matter who the reader is, there seems to be something accessible for everybody here?
Um,
Warned you, it was loaded.
mm, yeah, I wish I could say that it was all master planned. Um, but uh, I would say that it probably came about because when I was thinking about writing for uh, children, one of the questions that often came up with my son was, how does a boy become an Oxford boy? How does someone so small end up becoming friends with like such a huge animal? And so I was like, oh, um, okay, I need an origin story, And there is this really ancient poem in Zen Buddhism called the 10 Ox Herding Pictures. They're basically illustrated poems describing how someone would reach enlightenment, and they draw a metaphor in which someone is actually going into the woods to look for an ox and bring it home. And so that was the seed basically for Big Enough. And but in 10 ox herding pictures, the ox represents kind of this unruly, stubborn creature that needs to be tamed, but ultimately, in a very Zen idea, the person going to get the ox realizes that he and the ox are actually inseparable. They're actually one. They're one with the universe. There is no separation between them. It's just when we are living in our daily lives, do we feel identified with one thing or another that creates this idea that, oh, the Oxford boy is separate from the ox. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that's a little too out there, I think, for kids. But then I was like, well, then maybe I can just take some of that, some ideas from that, where it's like, okay, there are misconceptions about the ox.
Mhm.
And maybe it's the boy's challenge not just to bring the ox home, but in bringing the ox home, actually gets to know the ox better. And that's how they become friends. So I feel like there's a lot of like pendulum, like swaying back and forth. Like how I could start easy with like a very basic, straightforward storyline, but then I want to imbue some meaning, but then, oh, that's a little bit too far, so I gotta bring it back until I hit an equilibrium. So I guess that's the process that Big Enough went through.
Yeah. I just love that because another thing that I kept thinking of, and again, I can't say everything I want to say because I want listeners to be able to experience the book for themselves. But, this boy whose outside influences have kind of convinced him that he is in fact not big enough to do these things. ends up with a sort of transformation, I guess, from, in my perspective, an unlikely person thing.
Mhm.
That the very thing that convinced him that he was big enough and was capable and was able to do it, was the thing he was
Most
convinced,
feared.
yeah,
Yeah,
that he was
yeah.
most afraid of, which I thought, well, there's another life metaphor for you, um, as
Yeah,
well. So I can appreciate what you're saying about that pendulum of, okay, the concrete and the story versus the lesson, and how do you find kind of that
that
sweet spot
sweet spot.
there?
Yeah, the sweet
Yeah.
spot, the happy medium. And yeah, what you mentioned about, what we fear most ends up being, I guess, our greatest teacher in some
Mhm.
way. That does remind me of like is it Rilke had written in Letters to a Young Poet about how maybe the monsters or dragons in our lives are those very things that want to see us be brave and heroic, just once. And um, yeah, I think it's really powerful when we view our challenges that way.
And not only that, if you run from them, they will just keep finding you.
That is true. Yeah, life will continuously teach us the lessons until we finally learn them.
Yes. Yes. Oh, so tell me about the process of the creation in terms of the illustrations. Like, I'm lucky that I get to talk to you about both of these things. And as I mentioned, I was just so drawn into the expressions of both the boy, of both the ox. But I was also so struck by the transformation that we know happens in the story because of your words, but you can see it in their faces and in the lightness and in the expressions of what's happening as the story changes. And I'd love for you to talk about how you pull it together, right? Is it, well, first, I'd love the details of the how. Like, are you paper pencil? Are you digital? How do you do that? And then how do you go back and forth between the text and the images? And is that a back and forth kind of pendulum dance too?
Mhm. Yeah. So just to talk shop, I guess. I work predominantly on the iPad now in Procreate, so it's
Mhm.
all within a digital environment. Um, for me, I start primarily with the manuscript, actually just with a Word doc, and I'll make illustration notes as I go along the pagination. But in my head, I'm almost thinking about it like storyboarding for a movie or short film. And I'm thinking about pictures and words and which is the best medium to convey the one takeaway that I want a reader to get from a page or a spread. Um, and so all of that is happening pretty much simultaneously. And then after I have it mapped out, so to speak, in the Word doc, then I'll go into my iPad and start mocking up some sketches. And I'll always do it with 2 pages side by side. Because before I didn't do that with Big Enough. I just had like 1 page at a time. And then I realized that some of the really dramatic shots were paired next to images that were kind of boring and flat, and it was causing readers to kind of like skip over the boring flat one and just go straight to the dramatic one. And I was like, oh well, that breaks up the narrative structure then. And so I worked with my editor Alvina Ling and art director Sahu Fuji, who have infinitely more experience in all of that than I do, and they really helped me get the right pacing and compositionally create something that's very strong narratively. And yeah, we did do quite a bit of back and forth as we played with the number of pages that were available to us. And so suddenly it's like It's like I was working within a 32-page limit and, compressing a lot and then stretching it out to 40. Then I was like, "Oh, I have some blank space that now I need to like fill in the gaps for."
Right.
Um, and so as a I was completely new to this process, and so it was really just a huge help to have the editorial team and the art direction from the publisher to help me through all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I admit I've loved stalking your Instagram because I love seeing what I'm assuming are those first like pencil-like
Oh,
sketches.
right, right. I
I
completely forgot they were still there.
I love those. I love it because now having read the book and seeing what the finished product looks like, I am just so in awe of how a couple of brushes with that pencil does what it does from your hand. It would not do it from mine, but looking at it, it's just like, oh, yes, that's this. I love seeing that process. And so I wanted to make sure
Mhm.
listeners know that. I'll have you share your Instagram link later, but I do love seeing that. I love seeing, and I'm so glad you share those little snippets on there.
Yeah, when I was working predominantly with, analog materials with traditional brushes and painting on, usually it's on rice paper or stretch silk, actually. Um, I was really into capturing the artwork at different stages with the pencil sketches and then the line work is really important. It's almost like doing manga or comics where inking is such a huge part of the painting style and then coloring, just layering on color, waiting for things to dry,
Yeah.
layering on a little bit more. Yeah, and so, yeah, working in analog definitely allowed me that chance to, capture those milestones a little bit more. Whereas, yeah, like now digitally, like everything is on top of itself, and
Right.
so I I I should remember to like take screenshots and screen captures just to see it throughout the life of an illustration a little bit more. Yeah.
I would be so grateful. And then post them because I
Okay.
do enjoy that. I
Yeah.
am just a process person. I love seeing whether it's something written, it's something created, even if it isn't something that I think I ever would be able to do myself. It's just seeing how people get there is always so fascinating
Mhm.
for me. So yes, I'll be your little reminder to take some screenshots as you head into your next project.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great.
Now, as you think about Big Enough getting into readers' hands, what is your hope for the book? What is your hope for readers as Big Enough goes out into the world?
Mm, I guess from my perspective, I'm not an original creator, I would say, because I'm borrowing basically this art style that started in ancient dynastic China like 2000 years ago. And I'm borrowing ideas from that same time period by a bunch of dudes died thousands of years ago, right? And so I don't have, big ideals that this book kind of makes a huge splash or like rocks somebody's world, but rather just I hope it exposes new audiences to certain old wisdoms and old ideas that still ring true to this day and creates, a fresh appreciation for the the culture, the art, the ideas that for whatever reason has stood the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you will and you did.
Yay.
Now, I'd love to know if you could give listeners a little sneak peek into what's coming next for you after Big Enough.
Yeah, of course. So my next picture book is called Little Helper, and here we will revisit some of the characters that we first meet in Big Enough, except Afu's world is expanded in Little Helper, in which we'll get a more in-depth view into his village, his community, his friends and family, and what they do to essentially help each other out and in a way that everyone gets what they want in the end.
When can we expect that one? Do you have an estimated pub date?
I believe it's slated for summer of 2026.
Okay.
And so I will definitely keep everyone posted on that as we draw closer to the date.
Well, that is the perfect segue to ask where we can find you online so that we can keep up with you. Website, social media. I'd love to know the places that listeners can get in touch.
Mhm. Yeah, so I know, I mean, if folks are listening to this on a podcast, feel free to just go to the KidLit Love show notes and all of the links will be there. But Oxherd Boy is basically all of my social handles, and you can Google it to get the website also.
Okay. I'll make sure, like you said, to put all of those links in the show notes and certainly direct links to Big Enough so that listeners can grab that for themselves. First for themselves, and then for the young readers in their lives, because there is something for all of us to love and enjoy. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today and talking about it. It's a beautiful book, and I can't wait for people to just soak in the fun story and the beautiful messages of it.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. It's really wonderful to be able to share it with people who are interested in children's literature. And I hope that it has a place in your listeners' hearts.
Oh, it definitely will. It definitely will. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all of the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. You'll also find KidLit Love on Substack. That's where you'll find posts for each episode, monthly KidLit roundups, and an invitation to join my summer book club and go deeper into the world of children's literature. And if you loved this podcast and want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.